The neutral space station orbiting Kepler 438b had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Built by the Galactic Council for diplomatic encounters between species that couldn't safely meet on each other's worlds, it was usually reserved for trade negotiations or minor territorial disputes. Today, it would host a conversation that might determine the fate of two entire species. Taemin arrived first, escorted by Council security forces. The tall, thin Vrelian looked nothing like the confident xenobiologist who had condemned humanity to galactic exile. His once pristine robes were wrinkled, his large black eyes hollow with exhaustion and guilt. The Galactic Council had summoned him to explain how his assessment had led to the bloodiest war in recent galactic history. Several member species were threatening to withdraw from the collective over what they called the human question. The carefully maintained peace that had lasted for millennia was cracking under the weight of his words. "Ambassador Taemin," the station commander said formally, "your human counterpart will arrive shortly. The Council expects a full explanation of the discrepancies in your original report." Taemin nodded silently. He had watched the recordings from the war, seen the evidence that contradicted everything he had believed about humanity. The species he had called savage monsters was showing compassion that shamed the galaxy's supposedly civilized races. When Unji arrived, Taemin was struck by how small she seemed. Human diplomats were always smaller than he expected, their brief lives making them appear almost fragile compared to the long-lived species that dominated galactic politics. But this woman's eyes held strength that surprised him. Unji had lost her entire family in the first Kethtar attack on Earth's orbital habitats. She had every reason to hate the alien who had painted targets on her species' backs. Instead, she sat across from him with calm dignity, carrying a datapad loaded with information. "Ambassador Taemin," she said quietly, "I understand you've requested this meeting." "I have," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to understand what I missed. How did I get everything so wrong?" Hyunji activated her datapad, and holographic displays filled the space between them. "You looked at our wars but ignored why we fight them. You saw our weapons but not our hospitals. You counted our conflicts but missed our rescues." The first image showed human soldiers in an ancient war, sharing their rations with enemy prisoners. The second showed medics treating wounded on both sides of a battle. The third showed civilians rushing toward danger to help strangers. "This is from your own historical database," Yunji said. "The same sources you used for your original assessment. But you selected only the violence." Taemin stared at the displays, his mind racing. He had seen some of these images before, but he had dismissed them as propaganda or isolated incidents. Now they seemed to tell a different story. "I don't understand," he said. "Your species has fought constantly throughout its history. The evidence of violence is overwhelming." "Yes, we fight," Yunji agreed. "But look at what we fight for." New images appeared. Humans fighting to free slaves. Humans fighting to protect the weak. Humans fighting to stop genocide. Humans fighting to defend their families, their homes, their values. "We're not violent because we're savage," Yunji explained. "We're violent because we love fiercely. When something threatens what we care about, we fight to protect it." Taemin felt something shift in his understanding. His own species, the Vrelians, had achieved peace by becoming detached, by learning not to care too deeply about anything. They saw strong emotions as primitive, dangerous impulses to be controlled. "Your species fights because you care?" he asked. "We fight because we must," Yunji corrected. "When diplomatic solutions fail, when compromise is impossible, when the alternative is losing everything we hold dear, then we fight. But we also know when to stop fighting." She showed him records from human conflicts that he had overlooked in his original research. Wars that ended in reconciliation rather than domination, former enemies becoming allies, conquerors becoming protectors of those they had defeated. "After your Second World War," she continued, "the victorious nations didn't enslave the defeated ones. They helped rebuild them. They created international laws to prevent future conflicts. They built institutions dedicated to peace." Taemin felt his carefully constructed worldview crumbling. "But the weapons, the nuclear arsenals? Built because we learned that some enemies can't be reasoned with," Yunji said sadly. "But notice that we've had these weapons for decades and never used them again. We created the power to destroy our world, then chose not to use it." She pulled up more recent data, showing humanity's environmental efforts, their medical advances shared freely with other nations. Their space program that brought former enemies together in cooperation. You judged us by our capacity for violence without considering our capacity for restraint, she said. Yes, we can be terrible in war, but we can also be magnificent in peace. The revelation that hit Taimin was devastating in its simplicity. He had analyzed humanity through the lens of his own species' peaceful nature, unable to understand that humans fought because they loved, not despite it. Their aggression wasn't mindless savagery. It was protective fury directed at threats to what they cherished. I've destroyed 2 civilizations with my ignorance, he whispered. Not destroyed, Yunji corrected. Changed. The Kethtar are questioning their own assumptions about strength and conquest. Some of their soldiers have asked to remain with us to learn our ways. And we're learning that the galaxy judges by first impressions. The Council will demand accountability, Taimin said. There will be consequences for what I've caused. There should be, Yunji agreed. But they should be constructive consequences. The galaxy needs better ways to evaluate new species, better protocols for first contact, better understanding of how different forms of intelligence can coexist. As they talked, Taimin began to see the full scope of his failure. He had approached humanity like a scientist studying bacteria in a lab, looking for patterns without understanding context. He had seen their history as a series of data points, rather than the story of a species struggling to grow beyond its limitations. What happens now? He asked. Before Yunji could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts crackled over the communication system in a dozen languages. All personnel, this is Station Command. Long-range sensors detect a massive Kethtar fleet approaching the Sol system. Admiral Kyung-soo appears to have been replaced by hardline elements of his military. They're broadcasting threats of planetary bombardment unless humanity surrenders unconditionally. Yunji's face went pale. No, she whispered. We were so close to peace. Taimin watched her reaction and saw something that completed his understanding of humanity. She wasn't angry or vengeful. She was heartbroken that the violence would continue. I have to get back to Earth, she said, rising from her chair. It's too late, Taimin said quietly. Even at maximum speed, you can't reach them in time. Yunji stopped at the door, her shoulders sagging with defeat. Then my people will die thinking the galaxy hates them for what they are instead of what they might become. As she left, Taimin sat alone in the diplomatic chamber, surrounded by the evidence of his catastrophic mistake. Outside the windows, stars twinkled with innocent beauty, hiding the tragedy that was about to unfold. But something was stirring in the depths of his guilt and shame. If he had caused this disaster with his words, perhaps he could help end it the same way. The galaxy needed to hear the truth, even if it destroyed him in the process. He reached for the communication console with trembling hands. It was time to tell the galaxy who humans really were, even if his people never forgave him for being so wrong the first time. 1 year after the war began, Admiral Kyung-soo commanded the largest Kethtar fleet ever assembled as it approached Saturn's largest moon. This would be the final battle, he told himself. After this, the human resistance would be broken forever. Titan base ahead, reported his tactical officer. Human defensive positions detected on the surface and in orbit. Kyung-soo studied the displays showing the human defenses. They looked pathetic compared to his overwhelming force. 200 Kethtar ships against maybe 30 human vessels and a handful of orbital platforms. It should be over in hours. All ships prepare for final assault, he broadcast to his fleet. Today we end this war. On Titan's surface, Commander Junho checked his equipment one last time. He had been Hanyul's second in command on the New Horizon, the only senior officer who survived the first attack, because he had been on Earth during the test flight. Now he led what remained of humanity's space forces. All stations report ready, his communications officer announced. Junho nodded, looking around the command bunker at the faces of his people. They were tired, scared, but determined. Many of them had lost everything already, homes, families, entire worlds. This battle would decide whether humanity had any future at all. Remember, he said quietly, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that might face this same judgment someday. In the engineering section, former civilian engineer Hee-jin made final adjustments to her latest creation. She had spent months studying captured Kethtar technology, looking for ways to turn their own weapons against them. Today would test whether human creativity could overcome alien superiority. Power coupling stable, she reported. The new defense grid is ready. And the surprise packages? Junho asked. Hyejin smiled grimly. Oh, they'll definitely be surprised. As the Kethtar fleet moved into attack formation, they had no idea that hidden throughout the Titan system were dozens of modified human cargo containers. Each one looked like space junk, debris from earlier battles. Each one contained enough explosive power to cripple a warship. But the real surprise wasn't human technology. It was human allies. Unknown ships approaching, the Kethtar sensor operator announced. Configuration: Vrelian? Admiral Kyung-Soo stared at his displays in confusion. A small fleet of Vrelian merchant ships was moving toward the battle zone. But they weren't responding to his communications. Aboard the lead merchant vessel, Boram clutched the controls with hands that shook from fear and determination. She was Taemin's cousin, a simple trader who had spent the past year secretly helping the human resistance. She had seen what her people's judgment had caused, and she couldn't stand by any longer. This is Boram of the Vrelian trade fleet, she broadcast on all frequencies. We call for an immediate ceasefire. The Galactic Council must hear new evidence about the human species. Vrelian vessel, withdraw immediately, Kyung-Soo ordered. This is a military operation. No, Boram replied, her voice growing stronger. This is a crime, and we won't let it continue. Behind her, other Vrelian merchants moved their ships between the Kethtar fleet and Titan's defenses. They weren't warships, but they carried something more powerful than weapons. The truth. All galactic frequencies. This is Boram of the Vrelian Collective, she announced. I transmit evidence that contradicts the official assessment of human behavior. Across the galaxy, beings tuned in to watch what they expected to be the final battle against the savage humans. Instead, they saw recordings that Boram and others had secretly made during the war. They saw human soldiers sharing their medical supplies with wounded Kethtar prisoners. They saw civilian rescue ships risking destruction to save alien survivors. They saw Dr. Wu Jin's research team working frantically not just to build weapons, but to develop better medical treatments for both human and alien wounded. The most powerful recording came from the rescue at the damaged Kethtar transport. Lieutenant Jin Woo appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, his voice calm and determined. I don't care what species they are. They're hurt and they need help. The galaxy watched as human medics worked to save alien lives, asking nothing in return. These are not the actions of savages, Boram declared. These are the actions of beings who value life itself. Admiral Kyung-Soo felt something cold settle in his stomach as he watched his own soldiers being saved by their supposed enemies. Around the galaxy, other species began asking uncomfortable questions, but the battle still had to be fought. All ships attack, Kyung-Soo ordered. Ignore the Vrelian interference. The Kethtar fleet surged forward, weapons charging. On Titan, alarms sounded as humanity prepared for what might be its last stand. Activate defense grid, Junho commanded. Hyejin's hidden weapons came online throughout the system. What looked like space debris suddenly revealed itself as a network of mines and missile platforms. The Kethtar fleet, expecting an easy victory, flew directly into a trap that had been months in the making. Explosions lit up space as alien ships struck hidden mines. Human missiles, built with reverse-engineered Kethtar technology, punched through enemy shields that were supposed to be impregnable. But the real shock came when the Kethtar flagship's main reactor was hit. Instead of exploding, it began broadcasting human music on all frequencies. What is that? Kyung-Soo demanded. His communications officer looked baffled. Sir, it appears to be a concert, recorded from Earth before the war began. The music was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, performed by an orchestra that represented dozens of human nationalities working together. As Kethtar ships burned around him, Admiral Kyung-Soo found himself listening to the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly, our ships are requesting orders to withdraw. Morale is low. Kyung-Soo looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They had signed up to fight savage monsters, not to destroy beings who saved their enemies and created such beauty. The final blow came when a Kethtar cruiser, its crew compartment breached, began drifting toward Titan's surface. Standard procedure would be to write off the crew as casualties of war. Instead, human ships immediately moved to intercept. This is Commander Sung-ho of the rescue vessel Mercy, came the broadcast. Kethtar ship Vorthan, we see your situation. Stand by for emergency assistance. Admiral Kyung-soo watched in stunned silence as human ships risked everything to save his people. They used their own hulls as shields, protecting the damaged Kethtar vessel from debris while they evacuated the crew. "Sir," his second-in-command said softly, "perhaps it's time to listen to what the humans have been trying to tell us." Around the galaxy, the images of humans rescuing their enemies spread from world to world. The same species that Tai Min had condemned as irredeemable savages was proving capable of compassion that shamed their accusers. "All ships," Admiral Kyung-soo broadcast to his fleet, his voice heavy with exhaustion and shame, "cease fire. Repeat, all ships cease fire." The Battle of Titan ended not with humanity's destruction, but with both sides staring at each other across the void, trying to understand how they had gotten everything so wrong. In the sudden quiet that followed, Boram's voice carried across space. "Perhaps it's time we all learned to see each other as we really are, instead of as we fear each other to be." The tide of war had turned, but the real battle, the battle for understanding, was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the Kethtar fleet entered the Sol system, and Admiral Kyung-soo was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. What should have been a quick extermination had turned into a grinding nightmare that haunted his dreams. The humans didn't fight like the savage berserkers Taemin had described. They fought smart, and they fought together in ways that made his military advisors nervous. "Report," Kyung-soo demanded as he strode onto the bridge of his flagship. The massive ship bore scars from a dozen battles, and half his original fleet was either destroyed or badly damaged. Commander Hae-won looked up from her tactical display, her expression grim. "The humans have retaken the Jupiter mining stations. They used the asteroid field as cover and hit our supply ships with kinetic weapons. We lost 3 cruisers. How?" Kyung-soo slammed his fist on the command console. "We have superior technology, superior numbers. They're supposed to be primitive savages. Sir, they're not fighting like savages. They're using tactics we've never seen before. They turn their own cargo ships into bombs. They hide weapons inside civilian transports. Yesterday, they fired an entire asteroid at our fleet using nothing but mining charges and orbital mechanics. In the outer colonies, Captain So Young crouched in the ruins of what used to be Europa Station. Her small team of human defenders had been holding the position for 3 weeks against impossible odds. Her uniform was torn and dirty, her face marked with exhaustion, but her eyes still burned with determination. "Status report," she whispered into her communicator. "Kethtar patrol moving through Sector 7. Came the reply from Lieutenant Dongwoo, hidden in the station's maintenance tunnels. 12 soldiers, heavy armor, moving toward the reactor core. So Young smiled grimly. "Spring the trap." The Kethtar patrol walked confidently through the darkened corridors, their advanced sensors showing no signs of human life. They had learned to be cautious after months of ambushes, but they still thought like a superior force occupying primitive territory. They never saw the shaped charges So Young's team had hidden in the walls. The explosion brought down half the corridor and sealed the survivors inside with rapidly leaking atmosphere. The humans didn't need to kill their enemies directly when they could let space do it for them. "Another patrol down," Dongwoo reported. "That's the 3rd one this week." "Good," So Young replied. "Every day we hold this station is another day Earth has to prepare." On Earth itself, Dr. Woo Jin worked frantically in his underground laboratory, studying pieces of destroyed Kethtar technology. The physicist had barely slept in weeks, surviving on stimulants and determination as he tried to find weaknesses in alien designs. "The power couplings," he muttered to his assistant, pointing at a twisted piece of metal on his workbench. "Look at how they connect their energy systems. It's elegant, but there's a flaw." His assistant, Dr. Yuna, leaned closer. "What kind of flaw?" "They assume their technology will always work perfectly. There's no redundancy, no backup systems. If we can overload one coupling, it cascades through their entire ship." Woo Jin had already sent his findings to the military. Within days, human engineers were building weapons specifically designed to exploit Kethtar weaknesses. It wasn't about having better technology. It was about understanding that all technology could fail. In the civilian sectors, Min-A coordinated the largest refugee operation in human history. Millions of people needed to be moved from the outer colonies to safer positions deeper in the solar system. As a former logistics coordinator for a major shipping company, she understood the complexity of moving large populations. Transport 7 is ready for departure, reported her aide, checking the massive scheduling board that covered one wall of their command center. 3,000 refugees, mostly families from the Titan colonies. What's their escort? Mine asked. 2 destroyers and a fighter squadron. Mine shook her head. Not enough. Add another destroyer and a medical ship. I don't care if it delays the schedule. Ma'am, the military says they can't spare. The military can spare whatever they need to spare, Mine interrupted. These are our people. Every single life matters. This was what the Kethtar couldn't understand. Human military units abandoned strategic positions to protect civilian transports. Soldiers shared their rations with refugees. When colonies fell, the survivors didn't surrender. They became insurgents who made the occupation costly and dangerous. Admiral Kyung-soo watched the reports with growing frustration. His forces held most of the outer system, but they paid for every kilometer in blood. The humans seemed to care more about protecting each other than about winning battles. Sir, Commander Haewon said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. The humans are willing to negotiate. They've sent several. No negotiations, Kyung-soo snapped. They're savages. The Vrelian report made that clear. But privately, he was beginning to doubt that report. Savages didn't coordinate complex military operations across multiple planets. Savages didn't sacrifice themselves to save wounded enemies. As he had witnessed twice in the past month, savages didn't build hospitals in war zones and treat alien wounded alongside their own. The turning point came when a damaged Kethtar transport carrying wounded soldiers drifted into human-controlled space near Mars. Standard military doctrine would have been to destroy it or capture it for intelligence value. Instead, human medical ships raced to help. Lieutenant Jin Woo led the rescue operation, docking his medical cutter with the alien transport, despite the protests from his own command. I don't care what species they are, he told his crew. They're hurt and they need help. The Kethtar soldiers on the transport couldn't believe what was happening. Their enemies were risking their own lives to save them. Enemy medics worked alongside Kethtar doctors, sharing equipment and expertise to keep wounded aliens alive. When Admiral Kyung-soo saw the recordings from the rescue, transmitted by his own grateful soldiers, something inside him began to crack. These weren't the actions of mindless savages. These were the actions of beings who valued life itself, even the lives of their enemies. But the war continued, because he couldn't admit he had been wrong without admitting that everything his forces had done was a crime, so the killing went on, even as more and more Kethtar soldiers began to question what they were really fighting for. In his laboratory on Earth, Dr. Woo Jin made another breakthrough. He had figured out how to turn the aliens' own weapons against them. In her command bunker, Mine coordinated the evacuation of another 1,000,000 civilians to safety. On Europa Station, Captain So Young prepared for another desperate defense against impossible odds. And somewhere in the outer system, a small group of Kethtar soldiers sat in a human medical facility, alive because their enemies had chosen to save rather than kill them. They talked quietly among themselves, wondering how they had been so wrong about these strange, complicated, dangerous, and compassionate creatures called humans. The war was far from over, but its nature was changing. Both sides were learning that the line between savage and civilized wasn't as clear as they had thought. 3 months had passed since Taimin's broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy. Most civilized species simply noted the warning and moved on with their peaceful lives. But in the Outer Rim territories, where law and order meant little, other ears had been listening. Admiral Kyung-soo of the Kethtar hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the recording of the alien's speech for the 10th time. His species looked almost human, but their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of barely contained aggression. The Kethtar had built their empire through conquest and intimidation, always looking for new worlds to claim. Play it again, he ordered his communications officer. The holographic image of Taimin appeared once more, delivering his damning assessment of humanity. Kyung-soo smiled, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be human. Perfect, he said. The galaxy has already judged these creatures as violent savages. When we destroy them, no one will question our actions. We're simply protecting civilization from a dangerous threat. His second-in-command, Commander Haewon, looked uncomfortable. Sir, shouldn't we contact the Galactic Council first? Get official approval for military action? Kyung-soo laughed coldly. The council moves too slowly. By the time they finish debating, these humans might develop better weapons. We strike now while they're still primitive. The Kethtar war fleet was already moving toward the Sol system. 50 massive ships, each one capable of destroying a planet. They had been planning this attack since the day the broadcast reached their space. The humans' home system was rich in resources, and now they had the perfect excuse to take it. Meanwhile, in a secret facility hidden beneath the mountains of Earth, Captain Hanul was making final preparations for humanity's first faster-than-light test flight. The New Horizon was mankind's greatest achievement, a ship that could travel between the stars in days rather than centuries. All systems green, reported his pilot, Lieutenant So-jin. The FTL drive is stable and ready for activation. Hanul nodded, trying to hide his excitement. This was the moment humanity had dreamed of for generations. They were about to take their first step into the wider galaxy. "Take us out," he ordered. The New Horizon lifted smoothly from its underground hangar and shot toward space. Within minutes, they were beyond Earth's atmosphere and accelerating toward the edge of the solar system. The test flight was planned to take them just past Pluto and back, a simple journey to prove the technology worked. "FTL drive activated," So-jin announced. "Jump in 3, 2, 1. Reality twisted around them for a moment that felt like forever. When the universe returned to normal, they were at the edge of the solar system, farther from home than any human had ever traveled. "Jump successful," So-jin reported with a grin. "All systems normal." "We actually did it, Captain. We can travel to the stars." Hanul was about to reply when their sensors began screaming warnings. "Contact," shouted their sensor operator, Ensign Min-ho. Multiple large ships approaching fast. "Unknown configuration." Through the view screen, they watched in horror as massive alien vessels dropped out of hyperspace around them. The ships were unlike anything in human imagination, all sharp angles and menacing weapon arrays. "This is Captain Hanul of Earthship New Horizon," he broadcast on all frequencies. "We come in peace. Please identify yourselves." The response came immediately, transmitted in perfect English. "Human vessel, you will surrender immediately. Resistance will result in your destruction." Hanul's blood ran cold. These aliens knew their language, knew they were human. This wasn't a chance encounter. "I repeat, we come in peace," Hanul said. "We pose no threat to you. We're explorers, not soldiers." The alien voice that replied was filled with contempt. "Your own galaxy recognizes you as irredeemable savages. The Vrelian xenobiologist Taemin has documented your species' violent nature. You are a threat to all civilized life." Admiral Kyung-soo's image appeared on their screen, his glowing eyes filled with hatred. "I am Admiral Kyung-soo of the Kethtar hegemony. By the authority of galactic law, I sentence your species to extinction. Your world will be cleansed of the savage plague that infects it." "Wait," Hanul pleaded. "You're making a mistake. We're not savages. We seek peace with all species." "Let me talk to this Taemin. Let me explain." "There is nothing to explain," Kyung-soo interrupted. "Your history speaks for itself. Your wars, your weapons, your destruction of your own world. The evidence is clear." Min-ho looked up from his sensor station, his face pale. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups on all the alien ships. They're charging weapons." Hanul's mind raced. They were one small exploration ship against 50 warships. There was no hope of fighting, no chance of escape. But maybe he could warn Earth. "So-jin, full power to communications," he ordered. "Send everything we have back to Earth. Tell them what's happening." "Sir, that will drain our defenses completely," she warned. "Do it anyway." "Earth needs to know." The transmission burst across space at light speed, carrying Hanul's final message home. "Earth, this is New Horizon. We have encountered hostile aliens at the system's edge. They already decided we're monsters. They plan to attack our world. Prepare for war. Tell my family I'm sorry we couldn't bring back the stars we promised." Kyung-soo watched the human ship's desperate transmission with satisfaction. "Let them warn their world. It will only make their terror greater. All ships target the human vessel. Fire." 50 alien weapons fired at once, and the New Horizon vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence lasted exactly 11 minutes, but Hanul's message was already racing toward Earth at the speed of light. In 8 hours and 20 minutes, it would arrive at military headquarters around the world. Humanity would learn that they were not alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors had already judged them guilty of crimes they didn't understand. Admiral Kyung-soo ordered his fleet toward Earth, confident that the primitive humans would fall quickly before Kethtar might. After all, the galaxy's own experts had declared them nothing more than savage animals. He was about to learn how dangerous it could be to judge a species by its worst moments instead of its best ones. Humans might be capable of terrible violence, but they were also capable of terrible courage when fighting for everything they loved. The war that would reshape the galaxy was about to begin. Started by a misunderstanding, and fueled by the unshakable belief that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to destroy what threatens it. Earth's children were coming, home to a universe that had already decided they didn't deserve to exist. Taemin stood before the massive communication array, his three-fingered hands shaking slightly as he prepared to address the galaxy. The blue lights of the broadcasting station cast long shadows across his tall, thin frame. His large, black eyes reflected the data screens that surrounded him, each one showing evidence of humanity's violent history. Beginning transmission to all 47 member worlds of the Galactic Council, he announced, his voice steady despite his nerves. This was the most important moment of his career as a xenobiologist. After months of studying the species from the third planet of the Sol system, he was ready to give his official report. The holographic images of council members flickered to life around him. Representatives from dozens of worlds waited to hear his assessment. Some looked curious, others worried. All of them trusted his judgment. Taemin had never been wrong about a species before. Fellow beings of the galaxy, he began, I have completed my study of the species that calls itself human. They come from a world they name Earth, in a system they call Sol. What I have discovered troubles me greatly. He gestured to the first data screen. Images of human warfare filled the display. Soldiers with primitive weapons charging across muddy battlefields. Massive explosions that could be seen from space. Cities reduced to rubble and ash. In their short history of recorded civilization, humans have engaged in constant warfare. They fight over land, over resources, over ideas, even over the color of their skin. They have created weapons that could destroy their entire world many times over, yet they continue to build more. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Wars between civilized species were almost unknown in the galaxy. Most conflicts were settled through negotiation or economic pressure. Look at this, Taemin continued, bringing up more images. They call this the First World War. Over 15 million beings died, but did they learn from this tragedy? No. Just 20 years later, they fought an even larger war. They call it the Second World War. This time, over 70 million died. A gasp came from one of the council members. Such numbers were hard to imagine for species that had known peace for thousands of years. But it gets worse, Taemin said, his voice growing heavy with emotion. During this Second War, they systematically murdered millions of their own kind simply because they were different. They built camps designed only for killing. They turned murder into an industry. Behind him, Jiwoo shifted nervously. She was his research partner and closest friend, but lately she had been questioning his conclusions. She had spent time studying human art and literature, and she saw things differently. Taemin, she whispered, perhaps we should also show them the human hospitals, their rescue services, their— Not now, Jiwoo, he replied quietly. The council needs to understand the danger. He turned back to his audience. This is not ancient history. Even in their modern era, humans continue their violent ways. They maintain thousands of nuclear weapons. They fight wars in multiple locations across their planet. They pollute their own world and destroy other species for profit. The images changed again, showing environmental destruction, extinct animals, and modern conflicts. The council members looked increasingly alarmed. I have studied over 200 species in my career, Taemin continued. I have never encountered a species so dedicated to violence and destruction. Humans seem incapable of living in peace, even with their own kind. He paused, letting his words sink in. This was the crucial moment. Based on my research, I must recommend that humanity be classified as a Class 5 aggressive species. They should be quarantined from galactic civilization indefinitely. If they develop faster than light travel, We may need to consider more drastic measures. The silence that followed was deafening. A Class 5 classification was the most severe rating in the galactic system. It was reserved for species considered too dangerous for contact with civilized worlds. Are you certain about this assessment? Asked Counselor Vex-Ra, an elderly being whose species had been peaceful for over 10,000 years. Completely certain, Taemin replied. Every piece of data supports this conclusion. Humans are savage by nature. They cannot be trusted with advanced technology or contact with peaceful species. Jiwoo stepped forward. Honored Council, I respectfully request permission to present alternative data. My research into human culture shows the Council has heard enough, interrupted Counselor Vex-Ra. The evidence presented is overwhelming. All in favor of Class 5 classification for the human species. One by one, the Council members voted. Each vote felt like a weight on Taemin's chest, but he remained convinced he was doing the right thing. The galaxy needed protection from these violent creatures. The motion passes unanimously, announced Vex-Ra. The human species is hereby classified as Class 5 aggressive. All contact is forbidden. A warning beacon will be placed around their system to prevent accidental encounters. As the Council members signed off, their holograms fading one by one, Taemin felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had done his duty, protected countless innocent lives from human aggression, but it still felt like a tragedy. You've made a mistake, Jiwoo said quietly once they were alone. I've studied their literature, their music, their art. These are not the creations of mindless savages. Art means nothing when compared to their actions, Taemin replied. Even the most violent species can create beauty. It doesn't change their nature. What about their space program? They work together to explore beyond their world. What about their medicine? They spend enormous resources to save lives, even the lives of their enemies sometimes. Taemin shook his head. Isolated examples. Their overall pattern is clear. Look at their history, Jiwoo. Look at what they do to each other and to their own world. How can you defend that? Jiwoo gathered her research materials, her movements sharp with frustration. Because I see the whole picture, not just the parts that confirm what you already believed. She left the broadcasting station, leaving Taemin alone with his thoughts. Outside the massive windows, the stars twinkled peacefully in the void. Somewhere among them was a small yellow star with a blue-green world full of dangerous creatures who would now remain forever isolated from galactic civilization. Taemin told himself he had made the right choice. The galaxy was safer now. But, as he looked at the transmission log showing his broadcast spreading to every corner of known space, a small part of him wondered if Jiwoo might be right. He pushed the doubt away. The evidence was clear. Humans were savages, and savages had no place among civilized beings. History would prove him right. If only he could see into the future, he might have chosen his words more carefully.